Democratic socialism is like a dating profile. Things look great until you meet up in the real world. For example, Bernie Sanders, his big thing was always bringing single-payer health care to our country of 340 million. But when liberal, tie-dyed Vermont tried to do it for a population of 626,000, collapsed like that poor in the Oval Office last week. Bernie, AOC, Mandani are not Democrats. They'll be the first to tell you that. They're democratic socialists, and that's a very different thing.
If you've ever watched the Democratic Party flirt a little too hard with socialism, this feels like that moment when your friend yells, "Don't text your ex," and you do it anyway. Bill Maher just went off again. This time his targets were AOC, Bernie Sanders, and rising socialist star Zoran Mamdani, and he wasn't just annoyed. This was a full-on political intervention. Maher, a Democrat since practically prehistoric times, now sounds like the sober friend watching everyone else slam tequila shots at 2 a.m. He's staring straight at AOC and her socialist protege, basically begging them to stop before they wreck the party completely. Of course, they're not listening. They're doubling down. AOC recently fired back at critics, Maher included, with the classic "just meet the guy" defense. You know the one. He's great once you spend time with him. It's political Tinder. Swipe right on socialism and see what happens. Here's the irony. AOC suddenly wants open-minded conversations and face-to-face dialogue, yet she rarely extends that same courtesy to Donald Trump or conservatives. Now she's the champion of listening, which is either peak irony or selective empathy at its finest. Even moderates in her own party are raising their eyebrows so high they're practically airborne.
What do you say to the skeptic, though, in the party, or want to keep him at arm's distance, some who have some problems with him, even some fellow New Yorkers in swing districts outside the city?
Get to know him. Get to know him. You know, this is not about having any kind of hard line. I think that if anybody is skeptical, I would say get to know him. And once you get into a room with him, kick the tires yourself and make your own assessment instead of just kind of making assessments from what you may see on television. If you have the ability to meet someone in person, you should meet him before you...
Maher, he's not holding back at all. He pulls out one of his go-to comparisons, capitalist South Korea versus socialist North Korea, viewed from space at night. One side glows like Times Square, the other looks like an entire country forgot to pay its electric bill. Then he pivots to Venezuela, which was wealthier than Poland back in 1990. Poland embraced capitalism. Venezuela went all in on 21st century socialism, which turned out to be the same old version. The result was shortages, inflation, economic collapse, and millions of people fleeing. Basically a highlight reel of failed economic experiments. Maher's message is simple. New York isn't some magical exception. Socialism doesn't suddenly work better because you live in a trendy coastal city. Try to reinvent the wheel, he warns, and don't be shocked when it runs you over. Meanwhile, Zoran Mamdani isn't promising fantasy land. He's young, energetic, and charismatic, pitching policies that history shows tend to sink economies. And Maher isn't cheering the enthusiasm. He's looking around the Democratic Party, asking if anyone else notices what's happening. Are we really sleepwalking toward 2028 with blindfolds on? AOC says critics should just meet Mamdani. Maher fires back that they should meet history. And history, as he reminds everyone, has never lost when it comes to socialism failing spectacularly. Then Maher zeroes in on Bernie Sanders. Bernie has spent decades pushing single-payer healthcare for all 340 million Americans, but when his own state of Vermont tried it for just over 600,000 people, it collapsed fast. The takeaway is brutal. If Vermont couldn't make it work, why would anyone think New York could?
I know the kids think that stuff that happened before their appearance on the planet didn't really happen, but it did. We've run this experiment many times, and the results are always obvious. Here's capitalist South Korea at night from space. Here's socialist North Korea. Yeah. In 1990, Venezuela was wealthier than Poland. But then Poland, finally free of Soviet-style economics, went all in on capitalism. And now their economy is as big as Japan. And people there have high wages, low inflation, cars, vacations, homes.
Maher keeps driving the point home. Bernie Sanders, AOC, and Zoran Mamdani aren't traditional Democrats. They're democratic socialists, a completely different category, and they openly admit it. No hiding, no apologies.
Meanwhile, Venezuela traded capitalism for Hugo Chavez's socialism for the 21st century, which turned out to be like socialism in the last century, or any century, a mess. It turned one of Latin America's richest countries into one of its poorest. low wages, high inflation, shortages, outages, 8 million people fleeing. If you think New York can somehow reinvent this wheel, you're in for a rude awakening.
The real problem, Maher says, is that most voters don't even realize the difference. And then comes his hardest hitting line. The very politicians attacking capitalism owe their fame, wealth, and influence to it. Bernie's book sales, AOC's brand deals, their massive social media reach. None of that exists under true socialism. In a real socialist system, you don't become a celebrity by criticizing it. The system criticizes you, and then you disappear.
This election is taking place when we have an administration in Washington which every day is moving us toward an authoritarian society.
America, New York City, don't let them tell you any different. Don't let them tell you that we are the exception, we are the rule. So, America, I'm talking to you, Donald Trump.
Let our words ring out so loud tonight that Andrew Cuomo can hear them in his $8,000 a month apartment. New York is not for sale.
That contradiction is what completely drains Maher. The people screaming that capitalism is broken are the same ones thriving because of it. Now, that doesn't mean capitalism is perfect. Maher admits it's messy, uneven, and frustrating. But compared to socialism, which has a perfect failure record, capitalism starts to look like the stable partner in a toxic relationship. You know the TikTok analogy. One partner is chaos, the other quietly pays the bills. Capitalism is the boring but reliable one. Socialism is the ex who swears they've changed while holding a gas can. Then Maher points to Virginia Representative Abigail Spanberger, who warned years ago that Democrats would implode if they didn't move back to the center. Her advice was simple: stop using the word socialist. Moderates win elections. Extremists get attention, not victories. And guess what? She won. Not by channeling Che Guevara, but by not doing that. Did the party listen? Of course not. They tossed her advice straight into the ideological trash. This is where Maher gets that disappointed parent energy. The Democratic Party isn't being led by its moderates. It's being dragged by its fringes. The loudest voices, often louder online than in real life. Promoting candidates with radical agendas isn't bold leadership, Maher argues. It's political Russian roulette. Only this time, most of the chambers are loaded.
Now, Mendami seems like a nice guy, and I congratulate him on an extraordinary political achievement, but before the whole left side of the country catches socialism fever, let's listen to the other big winner in last Tuesday's election, Virginia Governor-elect Abigail Spanberger, who, before the 24 election, said things like, if the party didn't shift to the center, we will get torn apart. And we need to never use the word socialist or socialism ever again. Well, she was right, but they didn't listen. Typical, am I right, ladies?
And the silence from moderate Democrats is deafening. That silence isn't neutral, it's permission. When a party refuses to rein in its extremes, those extremes don't just influence the party, they become the party. Meanwhile, the numbers couldn't be clearer. In 2024, 13 Democrats won in districts Trump carried. Every single one of them was a moderate, not one Democratic socialist. Analysts looked at the data and reached the same conclusion. Move to the center, even the New York Times admitted the middle path wins elections. But did the DNC adjust course? Not at all. They treated that advice like a blender, tossed it in, and drank a chaos smoothie. Moderates are ignored while socialist messaging gets louder. The party isn't just stepping away from capitalism, it's quietly flirting with socialism, sending late-night texts asking if it's up.
At least the party has a clear choice here, very clear. One wing is saying don't ever use the word socialist again, and one is saying
I am a democratic socialist.
clear, huh? So how do we decide who's right? Well, it turns out we don't really have to flip a coin. We have the evidence. 2024, 13 Democrats won in districts Trump also won, all moderates. This isn't rocket science. All the left-leaning think tanks have done autopsies on 2024, and they all came up with the same message: move to the center.
Friend who ignored every warning sign and still asks why their relationships keep failing. Maher lands one final massive point. Socialism doesn't just fail, it fails loudly. It doesn't fade away quietly. It crashes hard. History is full of these experiments, and the pattern never changes. Shortages, inflation, economic collapse, mass migration. Venezuela is the clearest example. Around 8 million people, roughly the population of New York City, left the country. So when AOC claims New York is the rule, not the exception, Maher flips the argument. If socialism is the rule, then brace yourselves. The result won't be prosperity. It'll be collapse. He circles back to Bernie's Vermont healthcare experiment because it's too perfect to ignore. On paper, single payer sounds amazing. In speeches, it's inspiring. In reality, it fell apart. Costs exploded, the math didn't work, and this happened in one of the most liberal states in the country. If Vermont couldn't pull it off under ideal conditions, how is New York supposed to succeed?
Even the New York Times, which did so much to promote woke politics, now says the partisans are wrong. Moving to the center is the way to win. And Democrats should recognize the party moved too far left on social issues after Obama left office.
Maher's final message doesn't sugarcoat anything. Democratic socialism looks great in theory, like a dating profile full of filtered photos and motivational quotes. But meet it in real life, and the consequences tell a very different story. That story almost always ends in economic crisis. As he wraps up, Maher reinforces the point he's been making for years. America doesn't want fringe ideology. It wants practicality, competence, and common sense. If the Democratic Party wants to win in 2028 or any time after, it needs to stop chasing ideological purity and start appealing to the voters who actually decide elections. Will they do that, or will they keep ghosting moderates and swiping right on political disaster? Only time will tell. And that brings us to the end of today's commentary. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit like, subscribe for more deep dives, and drop a comment with where you think the Democratic Party is headed. Temporary detour or a long-term shift that cost them everything? Let me know below.
Zoran can't make your wishes come true. You're thinking of Zoltar. Democratic socialism is like a dating profile. Things look great until you meet up in the real world. For example, Bernie Sanders, his big thing was always bringing single-payer health care to our country of 340 million. But when liberal, tie-dyed Vermont tried to do it for a population of 626,000, it collapsed like that poor in the Oval Office last week.